China just fired the first shot in the economic war nobody saw coming. $52 billion in strategic silver reserves, dumped into global markets over 72 hours at massive losses. This wasn't profit-taking. This wasn't portfolio rebalancing. This was China sending a message to America that they can crash any commodity market they want, whenever they want. And the message is clear. The trade war just became a resource war. China is no longer competing for market share or manufacturing advantages. They're demonstrating the power to destroy American industrial capacity through commodity manipulation that makes military threats look primitive. What I'm about to reveal isn't economic analysis or market commentary. This is intelligence about the most aggressive act of financial warfare in modern history. An operation that sacrificed $52 billion in losses to prove that China can collapse American supply chains with a few keystrokes on a computer terminal. The attack began at exactly 2:47 AM Beijing time, not with missiles or cyber intrusions, with sell orders, massive coordinated silver liquidation across Shanghai, London, and New York, exchanges simultaneously. But this wasn't normal selling. Normal sellers try to maximize prices and minimize losses. These sell orders were designed to create maximum market damage regardless of the cost to China. Silver prices that had been stable for weeks suddenly collapsed, not gradually over days or months, instantaneously. 23% decline in 6 hours. 37% drop by market close. The selling pressure was so intense that trading systems couldn't process the volume. Circuit breakers triggered. Exchange officials halted trading multiple times. Market makers stepped away from providing liquidity because they couldn't predict where prices would stabilize. This wasn't market volatility. This was systematic destruction of silver market functioning through overwhelming selling pressure designed to paralyze American industries that depend on stable silver supplies. Let me show you exactly what China did, how they weaponized their silver reserves to attack American economic interests, and why this operation represents the most dangerous escalation in U.S.-China relations since the Cold War. China's silver accumulation began 3 years ago, not for industrial production or investment purposes, for economic warfare capability. While American policymakers debated tariff rates and trade agreements, Chinese strategists were building the largest strategic silver reserve in human history. 2,014 tons of refined silver, more metal than most countries import for all industrial purposes combined. The accumulation was systematic and coordinated. State-owned enterprises purchasing silver through global markets. Mining companies directed to sell production to government stockpiles rather than commercial buyers. International silver acquisitions funded through sovereign wealth funds and development banks. China wasn't buying silver for manufacturing. They were building ammunition for economic warfare against countries that depend on silver imports for industrial production. The United States imports 75% of silver used for domestic manufacturing. Electronics, solar panels, medical devices, military equipment, all depend on steady silver supplies that China can now disrupt through strategic reserve manipulation. For 3 years, China accumulated silver while American defense planners focused on conventional military threats. They built economic warfare capability while America built missile defense systems. Then they demonstrated that capability by destroying $52 billion of their own wealth to prove they could crash American commodity markets whenever they decided the strategic benefits exceeded the financial costs. The timing of the silver dump reveals the sophisticated intelligence behind the operation. China waited until American manufacturing was most vulnerable to supply disruption. Peak production season for electronics companies preparing for holiday sales. Solar panel installations reaching maximum deployment rates before winter weather restrictions. Defense contractors fulfilling government orders on tight schedules. They timed the silver crash to coincide with Federal Reserve policy meetings where interest rate decisions would amplify the economic impact. Higher rates combined with commodity price volatility creates maximum stress on American companies that depend on both affordable financing and stable input costs. The operation was synchronized with American political vulnerabilities. Election season, when economic disruption creates maximum pressure on incumbent politicians. Trade negotiation periods when commodity market instability can be leveraged for diplomatic advantage. China turned their silver reserves into precision weapons aimed at American economic and political pressure points. But the mechanism they used reveals even more sophisticated strategic thinking. China didn't just sell silver. They collapsed silver market liquidity to make American industrial procurement impossible regardless of price. Normal silver markets depend on continuous buying and selling that provides steady supplies to industrial users. China is massive, selling eliminated buyers from the market while flooding supply channels with more metal than normal market mechanisms could absorb. The result? American companies can't purchase silver at any price because market makers won't quote reliable prices for industrial quantities. Supply chains that depend on predictable silver procurement have been severed. Electronics manufacturers can't source silver for circuit boards. Solar panel producers can't secure silver for photovoltaic cells. Medical device companies can't obtain silver for antimicrobial applications. Chinese silver market manipulation didn't just reduce American access to affordable silver, it eliminated American access to silver entirely by destroying market functioning. American industrial capacity is being degraded not through direct attack, but through supply chain warfare that makes production impossible without declaring war or triggering military responses. Economic warfare disguised as market volatility. And the losses China accepted to achieve this strategic objective reveal how serious they are about escalating economic competition into economic warfare. $52 billion in losses from selling silver below acquisition costs, losses that China could have avoided through gradual liquidation over months or years. Losses they chose to accept because immediate strategic impact was more valuable than financial optimization. When a country willingly sacrifices $52 billion to demonstrate economic warfare capability, they're signaling that much larger sacrifices are acceptable to achieve strategic objectives. This silver dump is China testing American responses to economic warfare escalation, measuring whether American policymakers understand what just happened and how they plan to counter similar operations targeting other critical commodities. The response will determine whether China views economic warfare as cost-effective compared to conventional military competition. Early American responses suggest that policymakers don't understand the strategic significance of China's silver operation. Treasury Department statements describe the silver price decline as normal market volatility, without acknowledging the coordinated nature of Chinese selling or its strategic implications. Federal Reserve officials characterize commodity price movements as external factors that don't influence monetary policy decisions rather than recognizing deliberate economic warfare operations. Defense Department assessments focus on conventional military threats while ignoring supply chain vulnerabilities that economic warfare exploits more effectively than kinetic weapons. American leadership is treating economic warfare as market fluctuation rather than recognizing systematic attacks on American industrial capacity. This misunderstanding encourages China to escalate economic warfare operations because they're achieving strategic objectives without triggering effective American countermeasures. Meanwhile, the immediate effects of China's silver dump are cascading through American industrial systems in ways that most policymakers don't recognize as national security threats. Electronics companies are delaying product launches because they can't secure reliable silver supplies. Military contractors are requesting contract modifications because commodity market disruptions make original specifications impossible to fulfill on schedule. Solar energy projects are being postponed because panel manufacturers can't obtain silver at prices that make installations economically viable. Medical device production is being scaled back because silver shortages make regulatory compliance impossible. American industrial capacity is being systematically degraded through supply chain disruption that appears to be market-driven rather than hostile action. China is achieving military objectives through economic means that don't trigger military responses. But the broader implications extend far beyond silver markets to every commodity that American industry depends on and China can manipulate. Rare earth elements for electronics and defense systems, lithium for battery technology and energy storage, copper for electrical infrastructure and manufacturing equipment. China has significant control over global supply chains for dozens of materials that American industry cannot function without. The silver dump demonstrates their willingness to sacrifice financial gains for strategic advantage through commodity market manipulation. Every critical material that America imports becomes a potential weapon in China's economic warfare arsenal. And the precedent established by the silver operation shows that China can crash commodity markets faster than American industry can adapt to supply disruptions. 72 hours from normal market conditions to systematic supply chain failure, 3 days from stable silver procurement to inability to source silver at any price. American industrial resilience depends on adaptation timeframes measured in weeks or months. Chinese economic warfare operates on timeframes measured in hours or days. The speed differential gives China decisive advantages in economic warfare that conventional military planning doesn't address. Traditional military threats require months or years to deploy effectively. Economic warfare can be activated instantly through commodity market manipulation that American defense systems can't intercept or counter. China can inflict more damage on American industrial capacity through economic warfare than through conventional military action. And they can do it without triggering military responses that would escalate conflicts beyond economic competition. The silver dump reveals that China has evolved beyond military competition into economic warfare that's more effective and less risky than conventional military threats. But the operation also reveals Chinese strategic vulnerabilities that American policymakers could exploit if they understood economic warfare dynamics. China sacrificed $52 billion to demonstrate economic warfare capability. That's $52 billion less available for future economic warfare operations. Every economic attack depletes Chinese resources that could be used for other strategic objectives. Economic warfare is expensive for the attacking country as well as the target. China can't sustain massive losses indefinitely without degrading their own economic capacity. American countermeasures that force China to choose between economic warfare costs and other strategic priorities could neutralize their commodity manipulation advantages. Domestic silver production incentives could reduce American vulnerability to Chinese silver market manipulation. Strategic reserve development could buffer American industry against supply disruptions. Alternative supplier relationships could diversify procurement away from China-controlled sources. But developing these countermeasures requires recognizing that China's silver dump was economic warfare rather than market volatility. American policymakers who treat economic warfare as market fluctuation will never develop effective responses to Chinese commodity manipulation campaigns. The silver dump was China's opening move in resource warfare that could determine which country controls the materials needed for industrial supremacy in the 21st century. American responses to this opening move will determine whether China views economic warfare as effective strategy worth escalating or costly mistake worth abandoning. $52 billion in losses bought China intelligence about American vulnerabilities to economic warfare and American willingness to counter economic attacks with strategic responses. If America treats the silver dump as market volatility, China learns that economic warfare operations don't trigger effective countermeasures. Future attacks become more likely and more aggressive. If America responds with strategic countermeasures that increase the cost of Chinese economic warfare while reducing American vulnerabilities, China learns that economic attacks trigger responses that make economic warfare less attractive than diplomatic competition. The silver dump is China testing American strategic intelligence about economic warfare capabilities and American political will to counter economic attacks with economic countermeasures. American responses to Chinese silver manipulation will determine the future of U.S.-China competition. Economic warfare or diplomatic negotiation, resource conflicts or trade agreements, systematic escalation or managed competition. China just demonstrated they're prepared for economic warfare. The question is whether America understands what just happened and how to respond effectively. $52 billion in Chinese losses just bought them the most valuable intelligence in modern strategic competition. Knowledge of American vulnerabilities to economic warfare and American capacity to counter economic attacks. The silver dump revealed that China can crash American commodity markets whenever they decide strategic benefits exceed financial costs. Now they know whether American leadership understands economic warfare as national security threat or dismisses it as market volatility. The answer to that question will determine which country controls the resources that determine industrial supremacy for the next generation. China just fired the first shot in economic warfare against American industrial capacity. The target was silver markets. The weapon was strategic reserves. The objective was testing American understanding of economic warfare capabilities. The results will determine whether China escalates to larger commodity markets or concludes that economic warfare triggers responses that make diplomatic competition more attractive. America's move. And they might not realize they're playing the game.